Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Venezuela Solidarity Network's online picket and monthly webinar. This month, we're very lucky to have Orinoco Tribune co-hosting with us. In our program, it's going to be called Eyewitness Venezuela, Reports and Analysis from Venezuela's Legislative and Regional Elections. And before we begin, I just want to go through real quick with some interpretation instructions. Antes de comenzar, quiero compartir las instrucciones de la interpretación. El programa va a ser en inglés, pero si requieren interpretación, por favor sigan estas instrucciones. Un segundito. Este, entonces, para activar la interpretación, tienen que buscar el icono del globo en la parte superior e inferior de la pantalla y seleccionar el idioma preferido, que en este caso sería español, y también silenciar el audio original, que eso desactiva la sobreposición de voces. Por si tienen alguna duda, alguna pregunta, estamos siempre en el chat para resolver los problemas. All right, excellent. So tonight we are very pleased to have with us Katrina Kozarek, Yamir Chabud, Juliana Barnett, and Jesus Rodriguez Espinosa to talk about Sunday's mega elections, basically, where we saw governors and the National Assembly elected in Venezuela. And before we get into it with our guest, we're going to share a special video from Alison Bodine, who's one of the co-founders of the Venezuela Solidarity Network.
Greetings and solidarity from Caracas, Venezuela. My name is Alison Bodine, and I am coordinator of Fire This Time Movement for Social Justice Venezuela Solidarity Campaign and a member of the Venezuela Solidarity Network. Today, I am joining you as one of more than 300 international election observers who were invited to Venezuela for the legislative and regional elections that took place this past Sunday. Together, we represented over 80 countries invited to directly observe Venezuela's democracy in action.
On May 25th, the people of Venezuela voted to continue with the Bolivarian Revolutionary process by a great majority. The United Socialist Party achieved 23 of 24 governor positions and 82% of the votes in the National Assembly. This election was a great victory for the Bolivarian Revolutionary process, the people of Venezuela, and poor, working, and oppressed people around the world. As an observer, I visited 3 voting centers in central Caracas. I observed a process that was free, fair, and transparent. What follows is a video that I made the day of, describing the process of voting.
So now we're here in a voting center in El Valle, in one of the voting rooms in which people have already figured out through their identification card which voting table that they needed to go to today. We can see the first step of the process, which is a voter verification by comparing the person's identification card and their thumbprint. After their identity is verified, the machine unlocks behind the cardboard divider, and people are able to have a secure and private vote. Then a paper copy is also printed of their vote, which they deposit, as this woman is doing here, in the box, and then they sign and verify that they have voted on a registry. So following the voting today, these electronic records will be compared against the paper records in audits that will take place over the next period. But this is the process that people go through in a room. We also have in this room, and everyone has the right, all political coalitions have the right to have an observer. So the woman behind me here is one of the witnesses observing the voting process on behalf of one of the political coalitions participating in today's election.
Following the voting, at the close of the day, the electronic records and paper ballots are verified and compared against each other. This process is done openly, with scrutineers from all political coalitions invited to observe the counting, as well as the public. The verified results are then transmitted to the National Electoral Council. Further audits of the electoral system continue in the days following the election. At each of the voting centers I visited, I spoke with voters about their impression of the voting process itself. All of them expressed confidence in the voting process, as well as an excitement and commitment to express their democratic right to vote. This included both pro-revolution and opposition voters. even the opposition voters saw the electoral process as the way to bring a counter-revolutionary change to Venezuela, which is in contrast to the US-backed right-wing opposition that resorts to violent sabotage and attempted coups. This faction of the opposition boycotted the May 25th election.
It is critical that we keep in mind that the May 25th election in Venezuela took place under continued sanctions and attacks from the United States and imperialism. The Trump administration's policy is a maximum pressure campaign of attacks on people in Venezuela and Venezuelan migrants in the United States. The PSUV, or United Party for Socialism, governing party in Venezuela's slogan for this election was Gente que resuelve, or people that resolve. And with the election, they've dealt another blow to the continuing attempts by the United States to overthrow President Nicolas Maduro and the Bolivarian Revolutionary process in order to overthrow the great gains made by poor, working, and oppressed people in Venezuela over the last 26 years. In this sense, with this great victory for the Bolivarian Revolutionary process, Venezuelans have resolved to continue to defend their sovereignty and self-determination.
As President Maduro said at a rally I attended where the election results were announced, "This victory belongs to the noble people of Venezuela, to you, ordinary men and women. I congratulate you for all of your tremendous effort. After blockades, criminal sanctions,
The United
fascism,
States
and
did not
violence,
want to see
the
yet
Bolivarian
another
Revolution
free
has
and
proven
fair
itself
election in
stronger and
Venezuela.
more relevant
But the
than
people
ever.
of Venezuela have won yet again. Defending Venezuela is a central task for anti-imperialists and anyone who believes that a better and just world is not only necessary, but possible. We must see with clarity that standing for Venezuela's sovereignty and self-determination is the critical point for revolution and counter-revolution in Latin America. Anyone who believes that defeating imperialism in Latin America is an essential task will support and should support Venezuela. Let's redouble our efforts and raise our voices for hands-off Venezuela with more determination and more unity than ever before. Venceremos.
That was Allison Bodine from the Fire This Time and from the Venezuela Solidarity Network. And let's just jump straight to it. First of all, the first person that we have speaking with us tonight is going to be Katrina Kozarek, and Katrina is a member of the ANM-CLA, the Asociación Nacional de Medios Comunitarios Alternativos, the National Association of Community and Alternative Media, and is also part of the Movimiento Mujeres por la Vida in Lara and the movement of Women for Life in Lara in the state of Lara in Venezuela. Katrina, welcome, and thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Thank you for having me. Thank you to the Venezuela Solidarity Network for organizing this forum. Just want to clarify, Women for Life is a feminist organization. It's not an anti-abortion organization. It's a popular feminist organization that's been around for more than 30 years here in the state of Lara, and it is part of the revolutionary movement, historic revolutionary movement here in the state of Lara. I've been living here in Lara. It's in the kind of midwest part of Venezuela. I've been residing here for the last 20 years, working with community media, community radio stations. I participated with a communal television station called Lara TV. Right now, I work with several different radio stations, particularly Crepuscular, which is a radio station which was also founded in 1999, a community radio station that then has changed its location to what was once a government center and is taken over by the community in 2006. And we've been organizing with several different community media organizations on the state and national level. We actually just founded another community radio station in Carorita, in the Comuna Vencedores de Carorita, about 2 weeks ago. It was reopened. It was a community radio station before that. It had closed its doors, and we reopened it recently. I wanted to talk a little bit about before the elections. I've been outside of Venezuela for a part of last year, but I arrived on April 7th here in Venezuela. The campaign officially started on April 29th. I think it's a little interesting to observe the electoral the campaign process this year. It's been a little different than in past years. There weren't so many billboards or posters or large concentrations with big stages and huge sound systems from the Great Patriotic Pole campaign. It was more focused on smaller mobilizations, localized concentrations without a lot of logistics, without a lot of transportation. Still, there was pretty large turnouts in every community where concentrations were held. It was very focused on visiting community-based radio stations. It's interesting to note that social media has kind of taken over much of the communication. People don't watch television here so much anymore, but radio stations still, according to a recent poll, 70% of Venezuelans still listen to the radio. So that it's still a very effective medium for communicating with people, especially at a community level. And there was a large focus on community radio stations during this campaign. It was very focused on visiting house by house in organized communities, but also meeting personally with spokespeople from the communes, from social movements, rural communities, and workers' movements. It was a very interactive campaign where proposals were collected for the plan of administration and also to present plans which were already being made. The campaign here in the state of Lara, at least, was not accompanied by so many candidates for deputy for the National Assembly. It was accompanied by the candidates for the deputy of National Assembly, but the focus here, at least, was very much on the candidate for governor, Luis Reyes. He's a candidate. This will be his third term as governor here in the state of Lara. He was governor from 2000 to 2008 in 2 consecutive terms. He's a very well-known within the Chavista movement. He's known for his loyalty to Chavez. He was referred to here as the Chavez's Ordaneta, referring to Rafael Ordaneta, who was a military captain as well as a politician during the War of Independence, who was very loyal to Simón Bolívar. So he was referred to as Chavez's Ordaneta because he participated as well in the coup attempt of 1992. He was jailed also for 1.5 years and freed along with Chavez. And he was very, very essential in terms of getting Chavez into the presidency. And since then, he played an essential role within Chavez's candidate, and then later within his cabinet, and then later came to Lara as the governor. He was very known for his work within the administration in creation of infrastructure for health, with Barrio Adentro, with housing, with education. So amongst the older population, he's extremely well known and popular. And one of the things that I observed during the campaign is that most of the people, especially some people who are from the opposition, decided to vote for Luis Reyes, even though they might have voted against Maduro and might have voted against the government in past elections. But also a lot of the people who came out to vote were from older generations. Although there were a few young people, but most of the people who came out to vote were from 30 years and up. On May 8th, he presented his plan, which was gathered through, as I said, through the Reyes presented his plan, which was gathered through meetings with communes, with rural communities. It was very focused on, again, public health and infrastructure and services, especially for rural areas. It's important to mention, not just here in Lara, but on a national level, the rural areas have been the most deeply affected by United States sanctions, because there's been, in terms of health, there's been a lack of access to medical equipment and necessary tools to fix the medical equipment, specialized medicine, especially when it comes to cancer, and even transportation, because of the lack of spare parts to fix different areas of transportation. So he promised the inauguration of a new cancer center, which will be opened this week. There are also in the central hospital. There will also be an a system of ambulances from rural areas for people to be able to get from the rural areas to the central hospital, as well as dialysis. Dialysis is another serious issue where Venezuela has been affected in terms of the sanctions. A big focus on maternal health. The state of Lara is one of the states that has had the highest rates of maternal mortality. And this is also because of lack of medical equipment, lack of parts to be able to fix medical equipment, the transportation, the lack of access to certain chemicals which are needed to process exams within the public health system. He's also focused on the recuperation of infrastructure and construction of schools in rural zones, boosting agriculture, especially Lara is a very important state in terms of agricultural production, especially with onions, tomatoes, but he's also planning on building programs to help the production of coffee and sugar cane. Lara is the beginning of the Andes Mountains, and it has a large production of coffee. And that's something that not only serves for national production, but also can be for exportation, as well as the sugar cane. Those are kind of the key areas of the campaign, which were not only produced by the candidate, but also were brought about by speaking to the people in the community. Within the agricultural production, also a focus on seed production. Some of you might have known here in the state of Lara, there's a place called Monte Carmelo, which is in the mountains of the state of Lara, where they have an experience of creating seed banks and reproducing what are the indigenous seeds from this area. And they have a bank of seeds. One of the ideas is to create a bank of seeds and focus on seed production as well as mechanization. A lot of the rural areas have been affected by the lack of access to tractors, to be able to clean their lands, to be able to produce as well. And historically, especially under the administration of Reyes, those machines who were brought into the rural areas for agricultural production also stayed within those communities, and the rural communities could organize to use those machines to also fix their roads. And that's something that has been promised to return to the administration within this current government. In terms of the opposition campaign, it's been pretty much non-existent. There were 4 opposition candidates. Marshall Diaz, who's from the UNT, the National Union of New Times, the New Time Union. That is the party which belongs to Enrique Capriles. However, here in the state of Lara, Marcial Daza, who is a urologist from a private clinic here in Barquisimeto, is not a well-known figure. He doesn't have a really active past in terms of political participation, although he has participated within this party and within the mood, but has never played a political role here in the state of Lara. Roberto Sanchez, who is from the Democratic Alliance, Alexis Lamares, who is from Arepa, y Moner Chiriti, who is from Avanzada Progresista. As I said, their campaign has been pretty much non-existent. There have been some things for posts on social media. There haven't been any major concentrations or any major meetings. So it was pretty much non-existent here in the state of Lara, and the voting polls obviously reflected it. The candidate Luis Reyes won with 36.36% participation, which is low for the state of Lara, but taking into account the comparison with previous years, where there have been higher participation, but he actually won with 2,093 241 votes, and in the last governor elections in 2020, the candidate won by 192 votes. So there's not really, it doesn't really show that the lack of participation of the opposition in these elections really had a huge effect in terms of the results. As I said, the campaign for the National Assembly deputies was less visible. However, there are some National Assembly candidates which we could highlight. One is Adolfo Pereira. He's the current governor here in the state of Lara. He won within the regional list. We have Jennifer Lamas, who is a member of the El Maizal commune and the community union. And has also been active in the mayoral office of Simon Planas. She is Angel Prado's wife, which is the least important of all, but she is deeply involved and deeply connected with the communal movement within her district. She's in the 3rd district of the state of Lara. There was a lot of mobilization in her campaign, a lot of participation. The governor candidate went there probably about 4 or 5 times to meet with the different communes within Simon Planas, collecting proposals. We also have Fran Carlos Riera, who is a current legislative council deputy. She helped during her time as a legislative council deputy promote a decree for state mental health, and she's also been very involved in feminist policies and youth organizations. So those are two candidates from Lara who will be entering in the National Assembly, and we should probably keep an eye on them because they'll play an important role in terms of moving forward proposals from popular organizations, from the communes, and from feminist organizations. She's not from Lara, but I also wanted to mention that Albaniz Montilla, who is also from the community union, was also elected to the National Assembly. So we have several allies in terms of the communal movement who will be within the National Assembly. Also allies who have played an important role for the popular feminist movements here in Venezuela. The community union held in March a National Assembly of communal feminism, where more than 1,600 women from the communes participated to create policies that have to do with caretaking, sexual and reproductive health and justice, and protection measures for gender violence. And they will probably be promoting these policies once they arrive in the National Assembly. To talk a little bit about the day of the elections, I was in the street from 5:30 in the morning. I passed by at least 5 electoral centers at that time in the morning. There were probably about 15 to 20 people in line at the time. At 6:20, I received reports from 11 nearby centers, and all of them were opening and started to commence the electoral process. None of them reported any kind of problem. Once the centers opened, the lines did diminish a bit, but there was a constant flow of at least 5 or 6 people up until 6 p.m. After 6 p.m., maybe that flow went down to 1 or 2 voters at a time until closing time at 8 p.m. after we had 2 hour-long extensions. The voting process was extremely quick. It was estimated about 15 seconds. And it was estimated to be about 15 seconds by the CNE before the elections took place, and that was very close to reality. Most people who I spoke to chose to vote by list, which meant they just selected the party of their choice and hit vote, and it made the process very quick and simple. It took approximately 3 minutes to complete the voting process if they chose to select their governor and National Assembly candidates separately. As I said, they were mostly from here in the state of Lara. I observed mostly adults, 30 and over, older adults, 50 and over participating. I didn't observe many young people or first-time voters. This may be due to the fact that the candidate, as I said, is from the old guard. There's also, where I was located is an urban area. This might also have to do with a bit of disenchantment from the urban youth because of the economic instability. But it also has a direct correlation to the sanctions. Unfortunately, the youth who've grown up in this situation, it's a little bit more difficult for them to make the difference between what is being brought on by imperialist aggression and what they relate to the current government. From pictures sent from Simon Planes in the Almaizal commune, that reality was quite different. They had a large number of youth who were participating actively in the electoral vote, not just voting, but also organizing, also mobilizing the people. This is because of their personal candidate, Jennifer Lamas, and as well as a militancy and politicizing force of the communal union. Within the El Maizal commune and the communal union, they have a school of political education, which with the collaboration of the Movimiento Sin Tierra from Brazil, which focuses primarily on forming youth. So there's a different viewpoint in some of these rural areas, especially in the communal areas. Just to talk about, yes.
We're about out of time, so if you can please send your final thoughts and wrap it up, please.
Yes. Moving on. Maduro announced the constitutional reform of the 5th of January. That's something to take into account for next year. These National Assembly deputies will be working to create proposals for the constitutional reform on the 5th of January, which will have a focus on communes, but also economic policies. Before it was thought that it would be mostly kind of a closed door creation of this constitutional reform, but now they're talking about holding consultations. It's still not very clear whether it will be a massive participation or more closed door conversations with other organizations, but it's something to be looking towards in the next few months.
Thank you so much, Katrina. It's exciting to learn that Albani's Montilla was elected. She's very young, as you mentioned, and the fact that we have so young, dedicated people in the National Assembly, I think is going to be very helpful to motivate the youth in the future. Up next, we have Yamir Chabur. Yamir is currently in Caracas, as he was one of the people accompanying the elections. Yamir is a young Colombian-American born and raised in New York City, who works as a tenant organizer, advocating and fighting for the rights of tenants in New York City against the forces of displacement and gentrification. Yamid is a member and comrade to the Venezuela Solidarity Network. Welcome, Yamid. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you, Leonardo. Thank you for having me. Yeah, it's great to be on this webinar. And right now, me being here in Caracas, it's been a beautiful experience. My experience as an election observer, I actually was observing the city of Vargas in the state of La Guaira. They had us meet with the candidate of the governor, Alejandro Terán. And very interesting to learn about the history of La Guaira, learn about how before the ascension of the Bolivarian Revolution, it was a very abandoned area, and under Terán's leadership, it has been able to develop, it has been able to change. People's conditions are extremely different. You know, there's been a lot of housing being built, a lot of development for tourism, a lot of amusement parks, and very beautiful murals. Streets are very clean and very safe. So I was able to see a lot, you know, on the day of the elections, just, you know, see how people were rallying for this figure, and also see how people were in the neighborhoods and in his neighborhood where he grew up, coming together and supporting their candidate. And they say that actually that he got a lot of votes out of other governors that, you know, they're pro-Chavista during this election, but it was very inspiring just to see this change in Venezuela. Me coming from the United States, coming from New York City, we get a lot of propaganda. We're told that, oh, you know, Venezuela's a dictatorship, or there's no freedom, or people are not happy, or people are starving. And I see the reverse of that. Like, I see, you know, people very happy, people eating well, and people expressing, you know, their popular democracy, and also unapologetically. You know, like I feel like there's this like arrogance, but in a good way. It's like, you know, in Spanish is capricho, but in a way of like being unapologetic about their popular democracy and the revolution. So feeling that is filled me with a lot of inspiration, and as well as seeing like the amount of housing they have built for their population, and me being a tenant organizer, like I'll say, is just, and being in New York, like coming from New York City, one of the wealthiest cities in the world, where they're not building like housing for the population, and there's an increase of homelessness, and as well as increases of rents. But here in Venezuela, people are like, the government is building housing for their population, and this is because housing is a human right here. Because here in Venezuela, they're trying to develop people's livelihoods versus, you know, trying to just have a system that produces death. So I, you know, coming out of this process, you know, feeling inspired to go back to the United States and tell the truth about Venezuela, and also learn these lessons and try to apply it within my work as a tenant organizer, you know, to see that, you know, another world is possible.
Thanks so much, Hamid. To me, it's really interesting that you were in La Guaira, especially as a tenant organizer, because I don't know if you know, but about 25 years ago, there was a terrible natural disaster in La Guaira with flooding. And one of the things that really struck me in the aftermath was that if we'd had a capitalist government in charge, everything that would have been rebuilt would have been, you know, tourist attractions and hotels and high rises for the wealthy. But instead, what we saw was building for housing for working class folks. So I'm glad you got to see that, and I'm glad you got to witness the elections. Thank you so much, Emir. Up next, we have Juliana Barnett, and Juliana is an organizer and a writer, and she organizes in Maryland for an end to the genocide against Palestine and U.S. support for it, and does other cultural and political work in the U.S., Mexico, and elsewhere in Latin America. Juliana writes essays and fiction centering activists and social movements. And I first met her, I think it was in 2019. I think that was the first time we met as part of when Juliana was part of the Embassy Protection Collective. So very thankful for everything you did during that time, Juliana, and welcome to the webinar.
Thanks. Thanks, and hi to everyone. And it's great to be here. For me, here is actually the Cinco Fortalezas, which is 5 strengths commune, where I have come today following my election observer duties. And so it's in the state of Sucre in the east, town of Cumanacoa. And they have a really interesting situation, a very, very great commune. And so I'm going to be working with them on a stories of people power writing projects. But going back to the elections, it's good to hear from Kamir. I don't know if, aside from us, and Allison, of course, is originally from the U.S., but there was not a huge presence of the U.S. there. Like, a number of countries had 6 or 8, more, some quite a few countries, really were out in force to both support and to really observe and bear witness. And I think that as people from the United States, we have a kind of a particular mission that might be a little different from the others, because of course we are from the belly of the beast, and the government that is doing all these aggressions on the blockade, and also of course disseminating this terrible narrative about Venezuela, its elections, its president, and pretty much everything else. So what I feel is that as a U.S. person, my role is to be in solidarity, not judgment. In other words, I don't feel that I think in general, we were not asked to judge and say what was good and what was bad about the elections. So even we were given very, very thorough knowledge of the technical steps, the 16 steps from before and during and after the vote. And so we knew a lot, but definitely it was not part of our role to judge or evaluate. And I feel that specifically as a U.S. person, my role was to affirm that the Venezuelan people have a right to determine their own processes for deciding what goes on in their country and how they run their lives, the way every people has that right. And so the very, right from the outset, this judging of other people's, processes and calling them fraudulent and putting out all these falsehoods is, I mean, it's two levels of wrong, because it's of course wrong to fabricate, but it's even wrong just to do these, put out these judgments. That's, countries do not have that role or that right. So, and rather it's about being in solidarity, and also to learn. Personally, I was there to learn. It was very interesting to see all of the steps that went into the process that we saw the, at the election point, people engaged right there in, with the voting, maybe it was, I don't know, 4 or 5 of the steps, very, very quick. I saw that too in the several places that I was in Caracas. I was in Caracas, and it was very smooth, and everybody was calm and friendly. Actually, except for one person from Tiempo Nuevo, New Time Party, that Katrina mentioned, who just completely against the rules started proselytizing and talking about how bad Maduro is and the dictatorship, and giving the line that we hear both inside and outside Venezuela. And which is, I mean, in general, it's not correct for anybody with any role to keep proselytizing while in the very room that people are voting or campaigning, as you call it, when it's an election. But he was doing that. He was trying to sway us, and so this is part. I mentioned this in part because the reality is so much in contradiction with how things are painted in the U.S. I mean, relaxed. There were guards and military around, and they were just kind of hanging out, making sure, people saw that everything was fine, and being just friendly and relaxed. And this is what I've seen everywhere, including on the long trip from Caracas to Cumaná and Cumanacoa, which is where I am now. I want just to say more that that it's important to mention this, but it is very important in this thing about learning and telling people about it, is that elections are just an important part, a part that they care about a lot, but only a part of the process of self-government and participation in Venezuela. There are the communes and other ways that people, that what they call direct democracy happens in the heart of their work and their workplaces and where they live. And this is something that the U.S. In a different kind of world would be wanting to look at and understand. And I hope that as we show more about what actually goes on here, people will become more interested in this extremely important aspect of the election. The thing that makes democracy, the U.S. claims to represent democracy, but it is so far from what democracy in a real process of construction. Nobody says, they do not say that it's perfect, but they really are very clear that it's a process of construction that they refine and they work on every day. And so I just want to say that I think that I am looking forward to telling these things to people, and little by little to help, everybody here, and I don't know what, all the efforts to sway, especially the progressive people. I can't tell you how many progressive people said to me when they learned I was going to Venezuela, be careful, it really gets into our heads. And that's something that I think we all need to look at. That's why I do this fiction featuring activists, how activists are portrayed and stereotyped and erased and all of these things. So that's about it.
Thank you so much, Juliana. One of the things you said that really kind of caught my ear is the fact that there's a lot of people judge these elections abroad and judge them harshly without ever really going into the details about everything that's involved, including these 16 audits that you mentioned that happened before, during, and after the elections. And so I'm very glad you brought that up. And I hope to see you soon in Washington, D.C., so you
Yes,
can tell me in person about your impressions a bit more.
totally.
Up next, we have Jesus Rodriguez Espinosa. Jesus is an expert in international relations, Venezuelan politics, and communication. He served for several years as Consul General of Venezuela in Chicago, and before that, he was part of the foundational editorial team of Aporrea. He's also the founder and editor of the Venezuelan anti-imperialist news outlet Orinoco Tribune. That's www.orinocotribune.com. I highly recommend it. It's a great place to stay informed about what's going on in Venezuela. Thank you for being with us today, Jesus.
Thank you, Leonardo. Thank you. And thank you for the invitation. Today I prepared a slideshow that I believe I'm going to share with you right now. I hope it works. Give me just 1 second to put it on a slideshow mode. So here we are. Do you see it?
Yes, we can see it.
Great, great. So this is the structure of what I'm planning to say. I'm going to try to be very brief. Don't get scared. But basically, I believe that it's important first to highlight the international scenario and the threats in which the elections were held. So you have to say that regionally talking, I'm talking about Latin America and the Caribbean. In our opinion, in Orinoco Tribune, we feel that there's a stagnation and regional leftist movement, and that's not good for Chavismo, of course. I don't want to go into details because we might spend like hours here, but that's a reality. We have a regional and international rise of fascism that is not only affecting the region with presidents like Milei or Bukele, but we have seen that rise of fascism in other countries around the world. And that's something that is also affecting, somehow this election. Meanwhile, we have seen also a strengthening of relations with China and Russia, which I believe is very important for the successful surfing of the U.S. sanctions and the U.S. aggressions against Venezuela. And that has been seen with recent visits of President Maduro to Russia and Vice President Delcy Rodriguez to China, India, and Vietnam. So those visits are particularly important in this time when, the U.S. has been strengthening the sanctions, especially the ones against PDVSA, in recent months. And I hope and I believe that most of those contacts have been putting a lot of emphasis on how to bypass these sanctions. As I already said, we have been witnessing since February the strengthening of U.S. sanctions against Venezuela. There's a discussion between the pragmatic approach, somehow represented by Ambassador Greiner, and the maximum pressure approach represented by Marco Rubio. I believe that that's a discussion that is not too relevant. The important thing is that we have U.S. imperialism, and that it is hurting the Venezuelan people with U.S. sanctions that has been strengthened in recent months with the lifting of the sanctions against Chevron. With the lifting of the license, with the cancellation of the license that they gave to Chevron to operate in Venezuela. And there's a big conversation in Venezuela about that issue right now, because today is the day when that license expires, allegedly. Of course, we also, in the international, threat part of the conversation, that we have to highlight that there has been constant, repetitive, recurrent destabilization attempts, terrorist plans organized mainly from the U.S. No one can deny that, but also coming from, operationally talking, coming from Colombia, Ecuador, and other countries in the region. So the elections were somehow held in this, international scenario. Meanwhile, I believe that it's important to talk about the status of the far-right opposition, which always has been divided. But in recent months, there was this new important division of the far-right opposition with this new coalition formed by Un Nuevo Tiempo, which is the party of Manuel Rosales in Zulia, which at the same time was a division of Acción Democrática, and this new party called Unidad en Cambio, formed by Enrique Capriles, a very important far-right leader of Venezuela, that split from the strategy launched by far-right opposition politician Maria Corina Machado, that invited everyone to electorally abstain in these parliamentary and regional elections in Venezuela. So this division is an important division, and if you ask me, I believe that part of the good numbers that we might see in the turnout that I'm going to show you later, numbers might be the result of this division. I'm not saying that these good numbers are completely the result of the division and the participation of this part of the opposition, but somehow they might have an impact in the turnout numbers. There's a complete disconnection with reality. That's a trend that has been there for years, not to say decades, in the Venezuelan far-right opposition. But in recent weeks, months, the situation has been more evident than ever. I just wrote there some of the few crazy things that the right-wingers have been saying lately. A few weeks ago, Machado published a series of tweets showing some photos with some murals, paintings allegedly in the streets of Venezuela that I haven't seen one, where it said Maduro equals hambre, Maduro equals hunger. And that was something that when you saw it, you realized that was something with no sense. But it was made just days or the same day that Maduro traveled to Russia for the celebration of the Great Patriotic War that organized President Putin in Moscow. So González Urrutia, alleged victory. They even the people that you might believe that are from the far right opposition that have a little bit of brain, they keep repeating that González Urrutia won the July 28 election, and that's not an intelligent move, but they keep doing it. the calling for electoral abstention that I already mentioned, the Guacamaya operation where they allegedly miraculously extracted 4 people from the Argentinian embassy in Caracas, and they created this narrative in which they somehow not yet explain put those guys out of that embassy and send them to the U.S., where they a few days ago met with Marco Rubio. The other narrative about the entry streets on election day, we published on our X account a video about how untrue that narrative was, because they were saying that yesterday, I mean, on Sunday, the streets of Venezuela were desolated, empty, because everyone was sad because of the elections and were following far-right calls for abstention. That was a lie. I mean, everything was normal on Sunday, on a regular Sunday. Another thing is a victory with a bigger turnout that, I mean, they are saying that they are calling in social media after the election that was a victory for them. But when you see the turnout for similar elections held in 2005 and 2020, and you compare it with the turnout of these elections, you will see that there was no victory at all, even in that weird understanding of the word victory. Another important thing to mention is that the far-right opposition is somehow trapped in their alliance with the United States within the framework of this aggressive, racist, human rights violations against Venezuelan migrants held by the United States government, by the Trump administration. So that also is an element that is affecting their credibility and how Venezuelans, disrespecting their political positions, see the leadership of the Venezuelan opposition. So that's basically what I wanted to say, like an introduction for what I'm going to show you right now about the numbers and the results. I believe that it's important to say that the elections were held under sanction. It's important to highlight that those sanctions are affecting the Venezuelan economy heavily, disregarding all the good efforts that the government has and the Venezuelan people has been doing to bypass those sanctions. The elections were held under terrorist plots and terrorist threats. The election included far-right politicians, like I already mentioned, Capriles, Stalin Gonzalez. There are many far-right politicians from this new split in the Venezuelan opposition that I already mentioned. There was no state of siege decree in Venezuela as it was in Ecuador in the recent presidential elections. So I believe that it's important to highlight that. And now talking about the victory and the numbers, this is an uncontested victory with an important turnout of 42.18%. I believe that number, that is the number of the first report today, the National Electoral Council, I believe that make it at 43,000%. The PSUV, the ruling party, the ruling coalition, won 23 out of 24 governorships. We won 253 out of 285 seats in parliament. And there are 3 indigenous seats still pending because election for indigenous parliamentaries, deputies are held separately. And I believe that they will be held next Sunday, if I'm not wrong. And here you can see how the National Assembly was the current National Assembly was organized, the composition of the current National Assembly. You see the total numbers of deputies for this assembly of 277 deputies. That number is adjusted in every election based on population calculations. So this number usually rises, as you will see in the next slide. But PSUV has 256 seats, and the opposition only have 21 seats, including the guys from the Communist Party that are part of the opposition. No one can deny that. So now you see the results updated with the latest numbers announced today by the National Electoral Council. The National Assembly for the upcoming term will be consisted of 285 deputies. And out of that number, 253 were already assigned or awarded by the CNE today to the PSUV and Gran Polo Patriótico Simón Bolívar coalition. And Alianza Democrática, which has been something that you can say the democratic opposition in Venezuela, not very connected with the far-right opposition, they obtained 13 seats. UNTC Única, this new division of the far-right opposition, got 11 seats. Alianza Vecinal, which is another important party from the opposition, also mixed with far rights and moderate opposition politicians, gained 4 leaders, and LAPIS, which is something similar to Alianza Vecinal, gained 3 seats. So that's the composition for the National Assembly for the next term that we will begin working on January 2026, according to the latest update presented by the CNE today. In terms of governors, as you can see here, Zulia State, Apure State, Cojedes State, and Nueva Esparta State belong to the opposition in the latest regional elections. Right now, the map is different. I mean, only Cojedes State was able to remain in hands of opposition politicians. And I believe that it's important to mention that Zulia State is a very important state politically talking in Venezuela, but also Apure State, because it is the sorry, no Apure, I'm confusing the states. It's Barinas State, which is the state of where Hugo Chavez was born and where the family of Hugo Chavez is mostly. And that state was won by Hugo Chavez's brother, Adam Chavez. So basically, right now, all the governorships in Venezuela are in hands of PSUV or Gran Polo Patriótico politicians, governors. This is a table that I used to prepare something that I'm going to show you right now, which is part of the narrative of the opposition. They are talking about I want to show you the total votes, how they have been evolving through the years in parliamentary elections. And as you can see, the Chavista votes, there's a mistake that I noticed in this chart. The red, represent the PSUV, and the blue bar represents the opposition. And as you can see in this election, in terms of total votes, the PSUV received more votes than in the 2020 elections, and the opposition votes were smaller than in the 2020 elections. So that somehow says something about how wrong it is to say that the opposition won because there was an abstention. Another important thing to mention is the turnout. which also you can see here that is way bigger than in 2020 and in 2020 in 2005. As you can see, 2010 and 2015 have a different performance in the turnouts because they were competitive elections. The opposition was participating in those elections. But in 2005 and 2020, we had a very similar situation that the one presented in these elections. And despite all that, in this election, the turnout was 43-point-something%. Let me go back to, was 43.18%, which is something really important. I mean, you have to recognize that there's an important turnout for an election. And if you compare it with the turnout in other countries, like in the US, for example, you can see that it's very similar to the turnout for, of course, the presidential elections in the US are the ones that you see in 2008, 2012, 2016, 2020, and 2024. But if you see the midterm elections turnout numbers, you will see that they are usually moving around 40% in the US in the recent 20 years. The same thing happened with the European Union. So what I wanted to tell you is that the numbers of the narrative of the low turnout doesn't have any logic, and is in contrast is absolutely outstanding that a country in the conditions that I already mentioned, with the opposition, an important part of the opposition not participating in the elections, has the capability of show a turnout that the one that Venezuela is showing right now. So that's something that I believe that is important to say. I also have to say that for many Venezuelans, I mean, disregarding this optimist approach, we in Orinoco Tribune and many Venezuelans, Chavista Venezuelans, has been critical of the way the CNE has been delivering results in recent, especially since the last election. And sadly, in these elections, it seems to be repeated. I hope that I'm wrong, but that creates somehow an aura of opacity over the elections that we believe are not necessary, and that we encourage everyone to demand the fixing of this situation. I mean, right now we cannot see the result of the elections in the National Electoral Council website, and that's something that Venezuelans are not accustomed to, especially Chavista Venezuelans, because since the Bolivarian Revolution, since Chavismo took control of the country, the transparency of the Electoral Council was one of the most beautiful things that we had, and we need to keep that trend alive, to keep that information available to all Venezuelans. And just to finish, what comes next is, of course, for us, Chavista, for the PSUV, for the governors and deputies to resolve the problems of ordinary Venezuelans, which are basically the most important ones related to salary issues. The government has been doing an amazing work, is an incredible work trying to improve the salary conditions, but there's still this gap between the real salary and the bonuses that the government is paying. We have the problem of inflation that is heavily affected by the sanctions, and we have a problem with public services that we need to fix. Another important thing that is happening soon, and the date is to be announced, I believe that it's going to be announced very soon, is the municipal elections, in which I'm pretty sure that if the government, if Chavismo decided to put a date, election day for this year, will be very beneficial for Chavismo. And also, with that, we have the constitutional reform already happening, and the government has been talking a lot about, developing the communal state. Maduro talked about a communal electoral system during election day, which is something that sounds interesting, and it's something that we need to discuss also as supporters of Venezuela, because sometimes we evaluate, even Chavistas like me, evaluate the electoral system under the scope of the bourgeois democracy, and one have to begin to think about how to change it and make it more socialist, more rooted to the people, more rooted to the ordinary people. So I hope that this reform somehow will move towards that direction. And President Maduro announced that the consultation for this constitutional reform was extended for December. It was supposed to happen in the first semester of this year, but President Maduro announced during election day that he was extending it until December. So that's what is going to happen in Venezuela in the coming months. So I hope that this information helps you to have a better view of what happened and what will happen in Venezuela, Compass.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Jesus. That was super informative. I'm glad you mentioned the fact that the CNE, which is something that, as a Venezuelan myself, is something we take and still takes so much pride in past elections. And now it's tarnished a bit, not just because of, the
Yes.
normal attacks, but also because
and no one can see it like, I'm telling you, sorry for interrupting you, but
No.
but no one can see it like we are replicating the narrative of the right wingers, because it's not that. It's something that, as you said, is very already in the genes of many Venezuelans, Chavistas or not Chavistas, to have this amazing transparency on the electoral results. So that's something that we need to nourish and to keep alive. Sorry for interrupting you.
No, absolutely. That's I'm glad you said it, because you were more eloquent than I was. So just to remind folks that we do have a Q&A system. So if you have questions, please place them in the Q&A. But for now, I do have one question for you. I'm going to start with you, Jesus. If you could talk a little bit, as we saw on your map, that Guyana Esequiba is now red. Can you talk about the importance, the significance of the fact that people in Guyana Esequiba were able to vote for governor?
Yes, I believe that's a delicate question, not here for Venezuelans, but abroad, because there are a lot of people that say that this means an annexation of Guyana, and it is not an annexation. It's just an exercise of sovereignty that we are trying to do for the first time in our Republican life, and it's something that we didn't want to do. The Guyana and ExxonMobil somehow force us to be more, to push towards a higher exercise of sovereignty over the Guyana Esequiba territory, because they decided to break the 1966 Geneva Agreement that stipulated that Venezuela and Guyana should negotiate by mutual accord the solution to this territorial dispute. But in 2016 or 2018, I believe that it was in 2016, they decided to move the unilaterally the solution of the problem to the International Court of Justice. And that forced the Venezuelan government to organize a consultative referendum in 2023. And in that referendum, one of the things that was demanded by the majority of the Venezuelans was the incorporation of the Guyana Esequiba to the Venezuelan territory formally. That doesn't mean that we are going to invade Guyana. That doesn't mean that is a way to exercise sovereignty, taking into consideration what is happening from the Guyana side, that is not recognizing everything that we agreed before. So I believe that I need to finish this. I'm not sure. No, is the screen share already
It's not
finished?
sharing. Yes, it's finished.
Okay. So What I'm telling you is, for that reason, in this election, the CNE decided, because there was a law passed because of the consultative referendum, to call for the elections of the governor for Guyana Esequibo State. And that is a process that is not completely clear for me. I believe that even though we have, as a media outlet, we have been trying to gather as much information as possible, but it's something that, for example, I don't know exactly where those voting centers were located. I understand that they were located in the border, near the border of Guyana in Bolivar State. We are not, invading Guyana to put, but I believe that we need, as Venezuelans, more transparency over this issue. But it's an important move. And of course, that have created a lot of responses, crazy responses from the Guyana side. In recent days, there has been an important exchanges of, criticism between Guyana and Venezuela, top officials around this issue. But it's the logical response to the decision of Guyana to break the 1966 Geneva Agreement, if you ask me, Leonardo.
Thank you. And now a different question, Katrina, you as well, please feel free to chime in. A little bit about the turnout, because Jesus, you mentioned how on social media, it was almost like we were talking about two separate countries, with the far right saying there was no turnout at all. And then we'd see popular accounts, especially ones where communes are strong, of lots of people in line to vote, decent turnout throughout the day, solid. And, that's really shocking, these dual realities that we've lived with in Venezuela since the revolution, with the far right trying to impose an alternate reality. But in what I saw, well, I think it was yesterday or even the day of the election, was even Enrique Capriles recognized that the voting in Caracas in the popular working class sectors was much, much higher than it was in the richer sectors of the city. And he reminded everyone that Caracas is in Venezuela. So even the opposition is recognizing that Chavismo came out to vote. What is the strategy? What does it mean? I mean, I honestly find it hard to understand what the strategy of abstention is, because if you claim to have won the presidential elections last year, then to me, it seems like the obvious thing would be to press that electoral advantage and to prove that those elections were somehow, quote unquote, stolen from you by winning these new upcoming elections. But instead, they decide not to vote, or at least a sector of the opposition calls for this lack of vote. Could you talk a little bit about how you feel that, what the strategy means, and how Chavismo, how the grassroots Chavistas interpret this call to vote from the extreme right, and what they think of it?
Well, I think, I think that obviously divisions within the opposition have favored it has given the government an advantage in that sense. For better, for worse, the Bolivarian government has been able to maintain a certain level of unity within its factions, with something that the opposition has never managed to have. Maria Corina Machado, after the elections in July, I think a lot of people from the opposition, even if she would have called for elections, I think they're conscious that a lot of people from the opposition would not have gone out to vote, because they feel deceived. One, because after that whole process, the movement in the street, after the electoral process, the movement in the street dwindled very quickly. And after that, she hasn't appeared publicly since then, though she's supposedly in the country, but has not made any kind of public appearance. So a lot of people from the opposition feel very deceived by that process. And also her comments on the Venezuelan migrant situation, that she is fully in favor of Trump's decision to imprison Venezuelan migrants in El Salvador, is something that, one of her main promises in the electoral campaign for Edmundo Gonzalez was that they were going to bring home migrants, and a lot of people went out to vote for Maria Corina Machado because they have family in the outside of the country and they wanted to see them home without thinking much about what that meant or how that could possibly happen under a right-wing government who would open even more the gap between the rich and the poor. So I think they were conscious that even if they were to call for elections, they wouldn't really have an electoral advantage. And I think also historically it has been part of the opposition strategy within Venezuela is to deny the institutions. I mean, we saw even after the July 28th electoral process that they chose not to go to impugnate, to challenge the electoral results formally within the CNAE, and they also refused to turn in their supposed evidence to the Supreme Court, and that also caused them to lose some kind of legitimacy. And also it shows that they're constantly denying the institutionality within their own country, and they chose instead to turn to imperialists and turn to international forces to look for legitimacy. And so it's denying sovereignty in one way or another. So I think, it's always been a disadvantage on the part of the right here in Venezuela in terms of not being able to maintain unity for very long, not being able to mobilize an electoral stance, and also constantly denying the institutionality and favoring violence, acts of fascism, acts of hatred, applying to hatred within the country.
Thank you, Katrina. All right, so I want to give Jesus and Katrina the opportunity to make some closing remarks. But before I do that, I just want to remind folks that afterwards we're going to be taking a group photo. So prepare for that. Just use the raise your hand feature so that we will add you to the panel after they're finished with their closing remarks so we can take a photo as a group. I don't know who wants to go first in terms of closing remarks. If you have any. Jesus, would you like to go?
Yes, I just want to let everyone know that disregarding whatever you hear out there about Venezuela, especially in mainstream media, you have to take that with a pinch of salt because there are a lot of lights out there. And disregarding that criticism that some of us in the Chavista side might have on what is happening in Venezuela or how things are handled here or there, there is nothing farther from the truth than saying that there's no democracy in Venezuela or that there are not respect of human rights in Venezuela. So I believe that that's extremely important for people to understand because Venezuela and Chavismo has been showing the world that there's a different way of doing things, and we hope that regarding the challenges that we face, especially those that has been created by the U.S., we will prevail, and we are optimistic about that, and that is important. Just to close, I just want to add that Orinoco Tribune is on a fundraising, and if anyone can support Orinoco Tribune, that will be extremely important for us because sometimes people believe that we live out of the air.
Thank you so much, Jesus. Thank you, Leonardo, and the Venezuelan Solidarity Network for organizing this forum. Jesus, I think your analysis was very important. I also appreciate very much Juliana's perspective in that when we talk about democracy in Venezuela, democracy has a much more profound sense in Venezuela than just these electoral campaigns for governor, for the National Assembly, even for the president. There is a communal process going on. There have been processes of local consultations for assigning budgets, and there's a possibility with this new constitutional reform to really transform part of and deepen the democratic system within Venezuela. But above and beyond all of that, Venezuela is a sovereign country, and no country has the right to impose unilateral coercive measures which have proven to not affect the capacity of the government to be able to maintain itself in power, but have deeply affected the lives and well-being of so many Venezuelans here in Venezuela, and also those who have migrated to the United States are now facing oppression and now facing situations of extreme violations of their human rights.
Well said. Thank you so much, Katrina. Thank you, Jesus. Also, thank you to Yamid and to Yana for being on this webinar tonight. And of course, last but definitely not least, our two great interpreters, Jill and Giselle. And once again, we are going to do a group photo, so please start raising your hands so we can add you as panelists. In the meantime, as you all raise your hands, I just want to give a shout out to the sponsoring organizations of the Venezuela Solidarity Network, which include the Alberto Lovera Bolivarian Circle in New York, the All African People's Revolutionary Party, the Alliance for Global Justice, Chicago Alba Solidarity, Code Pink, Fire This Time for Social Justice Canada, Friends of the Congo, International Action Center, Just Peace Advocates, Luis del Bolivarian Circle of Toronto, Orinoco Tribune, Popular Resistance, Sanctions Kill Campaign, Task Force on the Americas, World Workers' Party, and Venezuela Analysis. And all right, so we will start adding folks to the panel. And I also want to, once again, I apologize for speaking over Allison's video earlier. For some reason, it wasn't appearing on my screen, and I thought there was technical issues, and then I thought it had ended. So if you all folks can turn on your cameras, we can say good, we can do a quick chant, and then we will be saying our goodbyes. I also want to remind folks that our next webinar will be Tuesday, June 24th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, 4 p.m. Pacific Time. The description will be available soon, but also visit us at www.venezuelasolidaritynetwork.org to join us. All right. Viva Venezuela!
Viva Venezuela!
Thank you so much, everyone, for being with us tonight, and hope to see you again next month. Thank you once again to our panelists.
Thank you.
Good night,
Un abrazo,
everyone.
compas. Bye-bye.